Hey everyone, so my name is Kenzie and welcome to my Teach 261 Think Aloud. For my Think Aloud digital tool, I chose to use Padlet, which is on our screen, because it was easy for me to organize the lesson ideas I had, and I felt as though it would also be easier for others to follow along with as they watched this video. The Think Aloud examples provided to us on ReggieNet used Padlet as well, but I personally liked how clean cut and easy it was for me to follow along as they were speaking what they were thinking. In addition, Padlet was also one of our play sites for this week. So I just thought that it would be beneficial to use it and explore it more in depth than I already did. So just getting started, I took both science and literacy last semester, so I thought it would be a good idea to practice what I learned by putting together a lesson that focuses on the integration of science and literacy together. For this activity, I wanted to plan a science literacy lesson geared towards the K-2 age range because I am an early childhood ed major, so it would be more beneficial for me because this is something that I can actually utilize and build off of in the future. This lesson is specifically developed around the kindergarten NGSS KESS 3.3, which is right here on my screen. Communicate solutions that will reduce the impact of humans on the land, water, air, and or living things in the local environment. Using the standard as the foundation for my lesson, I was able to define some key objectives that the students will dive into by participating intently. With this lesson, I wanted to include some lower level and higher level objectives so that students will not only understand what they are learning about, but they will also be encouraged to think critically and apply that new knowledge. Some of these objectives include students will understand how humans can help our environment by recycling. Students will compare products that are waste, compost, or recyclable. Students will distinguish items to be waste, compost, or recyclable, and students will facilitate a school-wide compost waste and recycling gathering. And those are all right here on my screen. So some essential questions that I had for this were based off of the lesson objectives. We were able to go right into asking some essential questions of the lesson. Some of these questions that will be asked and explored throughout this lesson deal with defining what waste, compost, and recycling is. The main essential questions that will be examined throughout the lesson consist of what is waste, what is compost, what does it mean to recycle, what makes something recyclable, how do I tell the difference between waste, compost, and recyclables, and how can I help the environment by recycling? Many students may know what waste is, and what it means to recycle, but they may not understand what compost actually is. By learning what these terms mean, students can then evaluate how they can help the environment themselves by recycling. This is the perfect opportunity to explore what all of these really mean and then take it a step further by connecting these ideas to their own daily lives. This is the part of the lesson that hits NGSS and will really be applicable in the final independent practice piece of the lesson, which I will talk more in depth about later in the Think Aloud. Because the lesson is for kindergartners and this is the stage where they are learning to read, I have integrated some digital tools that do incorporate written words, but I also wanted to use some digital tools that require various literacy skills. As I stated in part of my lesson purpose, my goal in this lesson is for the students to practice being critically literate. I chose these words very carefully because on the Korea's lesson template, it uses the term reading critically, and to me that just gives the vibe that I'm concerned about physically reading, but the goal of this lesson is not to read efficiently. Rather, the goal is to use the various digital tools I have provided in the lesson to practice the many ways to be literate so that the students don't get caught up too much on just the reading portion of the lesson being a younger group of students. I just didn't want it to be overwhelming for them. So for my digital anchor text, I am using a video, a game, and a visual aid, but it's important to note that I don't have a separate section for these tools on my Padlet. They are embedded in the corresponding parts of the lesson in which they will be utilized, which you can kind of see a couple on the screen right here and right here. For the gradual release part of the lesson, the three main components are first modeling the big takeaways from the lesson focus, then providing the students with guided practice, and finally allowing the students to explore the idea on their own through independent practice. For the modeling portion of the lesson, I think it's important for the students to get a better idea of what waste really is and what it really means to recycle. I'll utilize a very kid-friendly video that the students would be able to watch in order to gain a better understanding of that. So we can see the video's right here embedded, but I also already have a tab open for it, I believe. Yep, right here.
Enjoyed lunch today, but look at this mess. We need to clean up. Let's find the trash bin. Wait a minute. There are 2 different trash bins. And one of them has a picture on it.
There we go. All right, so that's just a little snippet of the video. I thought that it was very kid-friendly and it was very appropriate for the kindergarten age group. So instead of having the students read about recycling, waste, and compost, I thought they would be able to take more away from a video because they won't be focusing on being able to read efficiently. After they watch the video, I will then model different items that are recyclable and different items that are considered waste. I will have 3 items to recycle, one that is paper, one that is plastic, and one that is glass, and I will label all 3 of these items and discuss why they can be recycled. During this time, I will ask the students if they think each item is recyclable or not based on what they learned throughout the video they just watched. If they can't seem to remember, I can always refer back to the video or ask them additional questions to hint them onto the right track. This is also on my screen on this under the scaffolding section. This will be a form of scaffolding that I use during the modeling portion. After that, I will then physically place each item inside of the recycling bin for the students to actually see in real life. This part of the lesson should take about 15 minutes before we switch gears into the guided practice activity. So moving on to the guided practice activity, for this part of the lesson, students will be practicing sorting items as recyclable, waste, or compost. With this guided practice activity, the students will be using tablets, iPads, or computers of some sort. We will be using technology to play a digital game that allows students to practice what we are learning about. For the sake of this Think Aloud, I have linked the game from the internet, but they also have an app that will be very easy for students to access. So I have linked the game right here, but I also have the tab open. So as you can see, this is a game that the students will play. It has a trash bin, it has a compost bin, and it has a recycle bin that are all labeled for the students. And the students will just grab each item, so it says empty glass jars. So they'll be able to put this in different bins. The gift box. Some of them may be tricky, and then if they get one wrong, it'll let them know and they can try again. So I thought that was just a good way for them to practice, and the purpose of this is so that each student can independently practice distinguishing items as waste, compost, or recyclables, which is a part of the original objectives that I stated in the beginning of the Think Aloud. So as a side note, this part of the lesson is also a great time to incorporate working in pairs. So students can also practice with a partner on their technology as well. This will allow students to have some sort of guidance throughout the activity, and I will also be walking around helping students by providing scaffolds when needed. Something that I can do to scaffold students is to mention what they watched or heard in the video, and I can also remodel what I originally modeled with the objects in recycle bin as well. So these are also stated in the scaffolding section on my Padlet. This will take about 15 minutes altogether and hopefully allow them to ask additional questions as well so that they can get a good grasp on everything before they practice independently. So after modeling and guided practice, the students will then be able to do the final independent practice activity. Hopefully, move down here. Hopefully with the tools and practice they have already had with the subject, the students will be ready to take on the challenge of facilitating a school-wide compost, waste, and recycling gathering. For this activity, the students will be in charge of going to each classroom around the school to collect their trash and recyclables. Students in groups of 2 to 3 will be assigned a certain recycle bin or trash can to gather and bring back to our individual classroom. So in our classroom, there will be a giant recycle bin and trash can for us to gather all the stuff that the students had collected. The students will be in charge of deciding which items go in the waste and which items go in the trash based on what they have learned so far in the lesson. After the students have finished gathering all of the trash and recyclables around the school, we will then go outside. When we go outside, the students would each be responsible for finding one thing that is considered to be compost that they learned from the video and the online game. So in the online game, you just saw that they had flowers on there, and I think they had a banana peel as well. So those are both items that they had seen in the game that are compost items, so they can find items outside as well. Once the students all find their one compost items, we will then return to the classroom and place them in a bin. As a class, we will then discuss the importance of recycling in our daily lives and how we can all help the environment by being aware of what can be recycled and how to recycle. This activity should take in total about 35 to 40 minutes. And below, I have linked a digital visual, which is right here on the side, actually. Oops. And that gives facts and statistics about trash and recycling, which I think will be a great way to wrap up their independent practice and allow the students to reflect on the statistics that show the significance of recycling. The final wrap up of the lesson, which is right here in the reflection part, oops, there we go. The final wrap-up of the lesson will be coming back together as a class on the big carpet. We'll form a circle, and we'll go around the circle and verbally share one thing that they had learned today, or they can share one way with the class that they could recycle to reduce their impact on the environment. So the final reflection questions are on my screen. It says, what is one thing that you learned today? What is one thing in your life that you use that you could start recycling instead of throwing away? So these questions are important because they will require the students to activate the knowledge that they had just learned throughout the lesson and relate it to their own lives, which I think is super important for helping the new knowledge stick in their little brains. So the purpose of the final reflection is to reflect on the initial essential questions over here that I stated at the beginning of my Think Aloud, to reflect on the different ways that we can recycle instead of throwing stuff away, and then also to use the digital statistic visual. So that concludes my environment lesson plan using digital technology. Thank you so much for listening to my Think Aloud, and I hope that you guys enjoyed.